and welcome back to your daily dose of DragonFaether. Today we are going to be sharing a very long-awaited and very highly requested story time or series of story times tonight for my time when I spent lived in a castle on the Crossroads for Hecate. And this sounds kind of really wild, honestly, but it looked like a castle because the owner of the house, who is a devotee of Hecate, had renovated her house to look like a castle, which is the picture in the thumbnail that you see. So, hey Tim, welcome back to your daily dose of DragonFaether. Hello, Vaha, welcome. We are talking about a story time of when I lived on this castle that was like literally on a crossroads. What do I mean by that? Literally an intersection. It was like, you know how like houses like have like the intersections at some of them? It was like one of the corner houses. So it was like right on a crossroads. And the crazy part about that is that Hecate is the like ruler of the crossroads in the myths, right? So this was really kind of my true introduction to Hecate and her energy through my time that I spent with this devotee of Hecate. And I went to this, we're gonna start from the beginning. So my first encounter with this like castle at the crossroads, if you will, was when I was, I think maybe 16, and it was like 15, 16, or 17, I don't remember exactly which age, but I was with my dad, seeing him for like dinner during one of like the appointed days that I saw him at, because my parents are divorced and that's a whole nother story time. But I was literally very curious about finding places to go to learn about like paganism and witchcraft, and my dad was really supportive of that, and I love him for that. We love him for that. So we basically like looked up like metaphysical stores and like crystal shops and like different kinds of things like that on like, you know, just the Google Maps, you know, just area everywhere, like everywhere you can find basically. And we found this castle at the crossroads, and we saw the location was in like a residential area, and it really kind of confused us, but my dad took me anyway. And the first time I ever saw this like castle in the crossroads, it was literally so dark at night. It was like 8 p.m. I think, and like my dad and I drove by, and it gave us like such a spooky vibe that we were like, my dad decided, because I was so young, he was like, I'm not taking you here, and we drove off. So my first encounter with this place was actually really scary and off-putting, but it was late at night and we couldn't really see anything. And the way that the devotee of Hecate had like decorated the outside of her like garden was with lots of like posts that had like just like rugs and like banners and like material and sheets and cloth that like blocked, like made it more private, if you will. And there was like extra like fencing that she like added, so it was more of like a private space, because that was where she held like rituals, but we'll get into that in a second. And we didn't know that because we couldn't really see anything. So always my dad, honestly. Hello, Zebra Edits. Welcome everybody. I need to take a sip of the tea. All right. And then, okay, so then after that, it was like sometime later, like many months later, and then we were like looking for just like, I guess, things that were like open ritual or like open community-based things that were around like witchcraft, and then, or like paganism, like either or. And then we ended up not realizing that it was this like location, but we came back at a different time and it was like much lighter outside, and it was actually one of the like actual events that she hosted sometimes, because she sometimes hosted events, and sometimes I think she still does actually. But it was really amazing because as soon as we like pull up to the house, like that's when like my dad and I realized, we're like, oh wait a second, like this was the place that we like drove past that one time, and it really creeped us out. But like this time the atmosphere was so welcoming. There were all these like people who like, oh, I think we might have gone to like a magical marketplace, because they hosted like magical marketplaces once a season for like all the like witchy crafting vendors, and I actually like vended at it one time and have a video about it, but that's like later in the story. But it was really kind of like a really fun moment to be like surprised that like a place that we were like really like scared about and was like, oh, that's like really creepy, like that was like, it ended up being like literally much more welcoming. We're like, oh, so this is like when it's like actually open and like open for business, because we came late the first time. And our experience was really homey because it was literally in like her home, and the area that she had like before you get into the home was a very really beautiful front yard and a really beautiful like side yard that is where she like held her like rituals or hosted her circles. And when we first went there, there was a huge tree in the center of like a brick spiral path that like is very very witchy, for those of you guys who are familiar with like symbolism stuff. But the spiral path is usually associated with magic and stuff, so it is like, it was really beautiful to see. And there was all these lights everywhere and all these decorations, and she had all of these, you know, like statues and like, you know, butterflies like in the garden and like all of this. It was just like, it took my breath away. It was the most beautiful place. And like all of this ivy up the castle wall, which is like what you see on my like video thumbnail. And it was like really really crazy to like see how like beautiful of a space it was. Like the second you stepped in there, like you knew magic was real because of just like how magical it felt. And she would print out these like, you know, packets for everybody that were basically just like ritual guides. And literally they were just step by step how she was, you know, preparing each ritual and or each like ceremony, and then who you call on, all of it was written, and it was like a script for anyone to basically be able to take on different parts of it and participate. And the way that we were really introduced to it was through her open circles that she hosted. And it was honestly, for me, when I went, I was like really young and I like maybe have even like, I know I've talked about it a lot on this channel, especially when I was younger, but I went to these circles, and like when I left, I like got to take home this packet that was like a ritual that they like made for the whole group to do, and I was able to study those when I went home and used them as like almost like examples of what I could do to create my own. And that particular resource straight from the community, especially because it attracted like a lot of locals too, because it was like an open circle. Sometimes she hosted like private things too, but like for the most part she hosted like, you know, the open circles pretty regularly for like different Sabbats and stuff like that. It was honestly a beautiful beautiful experience. So I hope that I'm kind of just like focusing on telling the story, so chat's kind of wild, but we'll just chill with it, I guess. I'm not sick, I'm just feeling very sleepy, but we wanted to tell this bedtime story before we go to bed. So yeah, guys, it was really, really beautiful to have that experience. And then the devotee of Hecate was really surprised because I was so young, and she's like, you're one of the youngest people I've like had in a very long time. And it was kind of wild when my dad took me like the first few times, because genuinely like it was just like mostly people who were like 30s or later, maybe a couple people in their 20s, like late 20s, but like nobody in like their teens. Like I was like the only 16-year-old there. Like I was literally so small, but I was just like curious about the path of magic and curious about witchcraft and curious about paganism. And my dad was really supportive of that, which is just really sweet, honestly. But then I also have to say that like the most beautiful thing about it all was how she kind of just took me under her wing immediately, because she saw that like I was so young and so interested, and I didn't live with her like, you know, for like in the beginning, right? Like I didn't live with her until much later in life, but I had many experiences there with her, and I will probably have to make like, I could make this probably a whole series, because like I have so much encounters with this like, you know, space. And it's a huge reason why like I have this tattoo and like was so devoted to Hecate when I was like a late teen and like young adult. That was like really when I worked with her for the most part. And yeah, guys, like it was so cool because like all of these different these packets that she gave us were always different every time, but there was still like a structure that I could see. There was like a pretty good pattern that was like laid out, and it was just like, you know, remember the video that I made that's like how to cast and close a circle and then cut doorways too? I think that is the title, if I remember correctly, but that video is like kind of based on like the beginning and end of the like packets that I would get from her, like not verbatim, right? Like I clearly like used her videos as an haha. I used her, you know, packets as an example to make my own for my videos to share with you guys, and also for my personal practice, because like I always make a separate set, you know, like, and I've said that on my channel for many years, you know what I mean? Like I'll work on like sources that I see to like build my own practice, and then I share it, like, and that's always been like my process. But I don't like exactly share what I practice, because that like takes away the magic of me, and also I feel like doesn't allow anyone, or like not as many people, to kind of like make it their own, if that makes sense. Like it's good to kind of just have like a baseline thing when it comes to like witchcraft, of like a very simple example of like what you can do, and it's really much easier that way, especially for beginners, to have something that's more like basic step by step, rather than something that's like a completely specific practice, if that makes sense. But it was really cool because like I left these, like, you know, in these like rituals and stuff, like always feeling so inspired and like enabled to create more magic and discover it for myself. And that's large in part how I really developed that true like ritual based practice within witchcraft, and like some would call like high magic, because it was very ceremonial. Some of them were like very traditional like rituals, like the banishing of the pentagram. I think it's of the like lesser pentacle or something like that. Forgive me, I'm pretty tired. But that one is one that we did as well, like just to name one of them out of like many that we did. But it was honestly like my really first experience with like seeing like an elder, if you will, like doing something like that. And like, you know, I went to church as like a really little girl, and sometimes I would go with my friends as like a teen, and like, you know, a little bit as a young adult, and then I kind of just stopped going. But that's like the first time that I ever saw like an actual practitioner of like magic, and like ceremonial magic and high magic, performing it and including us in it to learn, which is like where like my training with her kind of really began, in a way that's like in like hindsight, that's kind of like how we see it, right? So another really cool thing is that she would host like Sabbath, like open circles for the Sabbath. So like Ostara and Mabon and Samhain and like Beltane and things like that. So she would host like a maypole, and like the first time I ever did like a real maypole was like at her ceremony, which was, or like I did it a few times actually. It was really fun. I don't know if I have footage on the channel, because like I didn't film a lot of the rituals just out of respect, but anyway, I digress. And then the ones that really like introduced me to Hecate specifically were these Samhain rituals, and ooh, I loved these so much as a kid. And I don't remember the exact year that I started going to these circles, but I just know that I was like 13 when I first started to go. I'm pretty sure the first open circle I ever attended was a Beltane ritual, which I absolutely loved it. And then also, I think it was like the second, third, or fourth ritual that I went to that ended up being a Samhain ritual. And this is when we ended up doing like throwing like spells into the cauldron. Like she had us like write paper or like put intentions into bay leaves and like throw them into the cauldron that was in the center while we were circling around it, which was really just absolutely magical. And this is where I really first learned how to kind of like understand that Hecate was so associated with Crossroads, because every time we did like Samhain rituals, I really remember the Samhain rituals with Hecate like more than anything. And we would take a plate of our food after we ate like to the circle, and we would put the intention in this like plate of food and then go offer it like at the Crossroads, which was literally like right outside of where the house was. So it was like perfect, honestly, because the house was like this on the corner of the block, and we would just come out the gate this way and then put it like on the crossroad, with like whatever intention or like, you know, whatever we wanted to. Basically, it was unique for every person, and it was really a very magical experience in the sense that like I had never got to be included in something like this before. The way that she had them written out, I would often ask to call upon like, you know, the element of water or call upon the element of air when she when we hosted these rituals. And this was how I kind of first learned how to, you know, help lead people too, because she makes it to where everybody gets a chance to try, you know, which is something that I think was really always lacking, especially in my church. Growing up as a kid, there wasn't any room for me to take a step inside of it and practice it, in the sense that I was always attending what the preachers said, and I was always attending the sermons and the classes and you know, studying. But I was always inputting information. I wasn't ever able to express it in a way where I could connect with my fellow you know, Mormons, if you will. But again, I was also a kid in a very just conservative space, so maybe that was the problem. I don't know. I really don't. But ultimately, it was the most beautiful experience in the sense that it offered me a different perspective that I had never gotten to experience in my lifetime. And Hecate was, I'm pretty sure, this priestess is this devotee's main deity, I should say, or goddess, I should say. One of the first times, I think if not the first time that I was there, she brought me into her private space and showed me her altars and showed me her different books and answered my questions about it, and would just let me see different spells and ask questions and that. You guys have no idea what a privilege that was for me, and how it really set a huge really solid foundation for my craft as a 16, 17, 18-year-old. I actually think I might have even gone there late 15 too, but I don't remember. I would have to look at my channel, because I definitely remember I posted a video about it. And then it started to, you know, evolve over time, you know, sometimes I wouldn't go for a long time, and then sometimes I would go for the magical marketplaces as a kid, but life happened, right? I went sometimes with that ex or the other ex, and it really was just kind of always changing, you know what I mean? But for many years at a time in between, growing up, I ended up not going to attend rituals or anything like that, just because of what was going on in my life. And then I got to a point with an ex of mine who we ended up moving out together, and many of my videos that I made were actually made in this space, how to find your kin type. That altar behind me was at this particular space I'm talking about. And then it was and then I love fairy tales, sorry. But it was really kind of magical, because when I went to one of these rituals later in my life, I want to say I was around 20, I don't remember exactly. It was 2021, maybe 22, 22. I don't exactly remember how old though. And the best part is that it just kind of happened so divine timing, you know what I mean? And I went to one of the rituals. I think I either went with my ex or with my dad again, and the owner of the house was yeah, I'm renting out a room if you're interested. And then she shows me the room, and I ended up loving it, and I showed my ex, and then we ended up moving in together. And it was really kind of a wild time, okay? While I lived there, fun fact, while I lived there, some of the hatchlings just happened upon me there. Of course, it's it was a local community with open circles, and a lot of people watched my videos on magic, and it's a very niche kind of topic, right? Especially back in the day. So I was bound to run into some of you guys, which is kind of wild. And while I lived there, I had to pretend I didn't live there while I lived there, so no one knew that I lived there. It was so awkward, but it was so magical getting to meet so many of you guys literally at my dining table, and I will forever just love that experience. So shout out to all you hatchlings who know exactly who I'm talking about. It was so lovely meeting all of you beautiful humans. And then I'm gonna do that every time, because I love Happy, the blue flying cat from Fairy Tale. If you've never seen it, you absolutely have to. Okay, so this is where the real fun begins, okay? Because when I lived there, I was able to see so much more of the house and experience so much more of the regular everyday witchcraft that like would happen with this, like, you know, with the owner of the house, like, and she was like honestly kind of like a grandma, like aunt, like family figure to me. She's like a guardian, if you will, in my practice. I don't really know exactly what to call her other than family, to be honest with you, because I just adore her. But the wonderful part about living there was seeing how much detail there was in her like magic that she like put over the house all over her lifetime, like, and over the years, and how she like regularly like upkept that, and like how she would always have like candle flames burning. And like, I know that some people would really freak out about that, and I do not recommend that. Okay, this woman was a professional. All right, I need to really stress that, like, do not attempt it like professionals. And so it was really magical, like being in a house like that. It was just magical being in a house like that. I also wanted to say shout out to the mods for like helping us with the chat, because I'm just really focused on sharing the story time right now. After I share the story times, we'll be answering questions. So if you guys have any questions, we will definitely get into them. But that's when I lived there, right? That's when I really learned about like how much Hecate was really important to her, and like over the years collecting like the packets, right? Because while I lived there too, she was still hosting open circles, and I would attend for the most part because it was literally outside of my backyard. But like sometimes if I was like on my period or I didn't feel well, I would actually be in the room, and I would just wait for, you know, the thing to go over, and like for the ritual to be over and the open circle to be over, so I could like grab dinner or whatever before going to sleep. It was honestly such a magical time, but like totally overshadowed by just like the hardships that I faced in the relationship that I'm no longer in. And like, we're not going to focus on that in this video, but it just kind of does like set kind of a context to the whole story, unfortunately. But like, the main thing that my takeaway from this is how different and unique magic can be, even within one practitioner, because I could see how her magic throughout the house like changed and evolved over the years. And like, it was a very like fascinating observation that reminded me more than anything that like witchcraft is a lifestyle. In the sense, it's like a practice, it's the way that you live your life. It's like, the reason why it's called a lifestyle is because it's the style that you curate your life in, if people forgot that, you know. And there's so many negative connotations to like witchcraft and like magic and like spells and all of that, and it's really unfortunate because especially in today's day and age, like humans have evolved so much just because of the internet and their access to like understanding of magic, right? Like, I would have never met this like woman who hosts these like open circles if I didn't have the internet to search that on. Like, let's be so for real. Like, even though it was so close to me, how would I ever have found my way exactly to that location unless I was able to use GPS? Like, let's not kid ourselves, okay? Like, we have amazing tools at our disposal right now that I think often we take for granted sometimes, and it's kind of a tragedy. But like, I want to kind of like, you know, just remind people the magic that can happen when you take advantage of it and you do the best that you can to use it as a tool to enable you to grow and to connect with other people and find people who are just like you. It's really just my favorite, you know, thing about this whole entire life that I have, to be honest. Cheers, friends. Because everything that I love in my life, I wouldn't have it without the internet. Like, first and foremost, the hatchlings and being able to chat with you guys right now. But again, with like being able to find all the stuff that I have out about witchcraft, none of that. Like, also, like, I met my fiance like on literally Facebook. Like, that's another part of it. Like, there's just so much that goes into it. And I just really think people, you know, take that for granted. At least I see that happen a lot, unfortunately. Which is why I just try to like be vocal about it. You know, like, let's talk about how like we can just use it to help each other and find people who are like us and uplift each other. And honestly, learn about people who we have never had any exposure to. That's kind of the whole point of like, I think, the internet, you know? But that is just my perspective. So when I began to live there, I was really able to explore my witchcraft in a different way. Like, I had like an outside practice, like outside of the house, with all of the magic and stuff that was out there, because she even had an alchemy lab outside of the house too. So like, let's not forget that. Shout out to her alchemy lab, that blew me away. And there was just so many opportunities for me at my disposal, and she was really like open to it. She was like, hey, if there's anything you're curious about, just ask me. Like, she was really sweet about that, of course. And so when I spent my time there, I really just tried my best to interact with it, despite like how like sad I was sometimes, and just some of the dark things that I was going through at that time. I tried to take advantage of just forcing myself to just take a step outside and like, you know, journal with like, you know, the nature and interact with it. And like, I was also really inspired to like create there. Like, I made some of like my favorite books there, and some of my most like, I would say, spectacular like creations there. And it's truly because like that house was so like magical and like so like open and curated to receiving that. And it really taught me about how important it is to, you know, curate a space to resonate, if you will, in like the energy or the like just like the vibes that you want to attract in your space. Like, do you want it to be more clean and open? Do you want it to be more like moody? Like, do you want it to feel more like, you know, overgrown with like plants and stuff? Like, it's really such a personal decision. And I think that's what I find so fascinating about human beings, is that we all have like the same like brains and hearts and lungs and like, you know, blood that like keeps our like organs oxygenated. But how in the world are we so different when it comes to believing things, and to what like we feel and how we feel and who we're drawn to and who we're repelled by? Like, that is why I just need to learn about things like that. It's really important. I love it. I love it so much. 10 out of 10. And I think there's a lot to learn even from like the bad stuff. Like, I think that's kind of the whole point of those who don't learn about history are doomed to repeat it. That is why I'm so hell-bent on learning too, you know? Like, it's not just a pursuit of what I'm passionate about, it's also the pursuit of protecting what's precious, and all humans and their cultures and the way they express themselves are precious. I think that's what makes us have such a beautiful spectrum of humanity. Like, there's nothing that we need to do to force control on each other. Like, that's just kind of like, I think, the root of all sadness for the most part, especially when we like force like destruction of our land like to be witnessed and stuff. That too, I think, just takes a real toll on like the human soul in a way that some people won't even acknowledge. But for those who know, they know, and those who see, they, you know, they're feeling it. But ultimately, Hecate and my time with Hecate started really truly happening like on a more regular basis, and I started interacting with like, you know, her energy and like spells themed after her and rituals, you know, with her. And I worked with her in like a triple moon like type of way, or a triple goddess type of way. I know that's kind of like a new age perspective, but that's just like a disclaimer of where like my story comes from. So like, for those who are listening and curious. And my favorite part about discovering my, you know, my experiences with Hecate was that triple aspect. It really helped me heal the like Christian Trinity that was like forced upon me. And I think this was a huge part of like healing from my religious abuse, if you will, was like the symbolism behind that. Like, when I was in like Mormon churches, like I just really very remember like Jesus and like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and like Jesus somehow being all of it. And I was just very confused, right? Very confused. And it wasn't really clarified to me as a kid. And when I had questions, I just like literally got like scolded, or like verbally abused, or like shamed, or like even like little ruler pats. Like, sure, it wasn't like, sometimes it wasn't like enough to like hurt, right? But it's like the act of like even striking lightly is kind of like abusive. Like, we know this, we know how it registers in the brains. Like, we can't, in the brains, we know how it registers in the brain. That's funny. That's why we can't ignore it, you know what I mean? Like, can't, like, facts don't care about your feelings, right? But sometimes their feelings don't care about your facts, so just watch out for that. Thank you. I know it's a lot sometimes. Oh, Potat says hi. By the way, this is our channel mascot. He is the best little dude ever. We love him. Potat, Potat. But this like encounter for me with Hecate was like maiden mother crone like aspect of Hecate. I know some people have like a different version of it with like perhaps like different goddesses in their like experience, but with me that was my experience. And it was the first time I'd ever like experienced like, you know, like divinity as like female or feminine or like as a woman, or like the like in my like reflection, if you will, because like that's kind of how I was raised with Mormonism. It's like God, like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost or Holy Spirit was like very much so like in a masculine context, and that like was really hard for my brain to understand. So Hecate is from Greek mythology, yeah. And I really honestly like needed that experience in my life in order to kind of like heal that part of me that was still like struggling to connect with God. I didn't understand it at that time because I was just like, I've been so hurt by like the men, like also women in the church, but like it was just so much for me. And I did not know how to navigate that. Nope, I had no idea. But when I found, you know, this devotee of Hecate who hosted open circles, who allowed me to attend them, who I eventually lived with after having all of this experience with her, with these packets that were like just ritual examples and spell examples, and like they included like, you know, lore and stuff and footnotes and stuff, which made it even more helpful. They were geared towards beginners, but they were like outlines of like high magic, if you will. So that part was like, again, like a really fun crossroads. And in my time there, it was all about identifying where things overlap and identifying where, you know, you come to certain places in your life where you have to make really tough decisions. I had to make the most hardest decisions of my life in the house, truly. And I remember when I made the decision to confront my like then ex about one thing for one last time, that was the string that unraveled us, like separating. And I cried many nights not knowing what I was gonna do in that situation. But eventually, through practicing my magic while I was there and crafting things and making spell like different kinds of spells and exploring my magic and my craft truly in a very physical way, right? Like with the materials and in like a ritualistic manner, like what does that look like for me? That is where I realized where my heart truly belonged. And I realized what I was like, I was worthy of so many more things than I was allowing myself to accept. And I really was very overwhelmed by these decisions I had to make. And like I said, they were some of the hardest ones that I ever made. But as soon as I made these decisions, as soon as I decided to cut things off with this person and into that entire part of my life that was holding me back from really showing up how I wanted to be myself, that is when I connected with my fiance, who I know and love now. And it was really a lesson that I learned working with Hecate, working with the rituals that I learned over the years, creating my own, spending time with the magic that I learned about her. That is the point that I want to drive home for everybody, because it was in that regular practice that I had with her that really enabled me to feel confident enough to like branch out and do my own thing. You know what I mean? Like I knew, I was like, finally, I'm like, you know what? I actually know what I want to do now in my craft. Like, and it was almost like a little like impromptu, like graduation, if you will, like a coming of age type of experience when I moved out of that house after I had broken up with that person. I know that it really kind of like almost damaged my connection to that space because of how many memories that were rough and hard and difficult and triggering for me that I had to live throughout there. And perhaps that's part of the reason why I've stayed away for so long. But that's kind of how the relationship with me in that space has always been, I would go there, have really huge breakthroughs in my life with Hecate, and then transition to a new point of my life. And the reason why I find that so symbolic is because literally the phases of the moon, right? It's part of why I got this tattoo with the like triple goddess and the pentacle inside instead of just getting like a pentacle, because I wanted to get something that represented my witchcraft and my dedication to my magic, and to remind myself that no matter what, I would always be on a left-handed path. That's why it's on my left hand, right? Or my left arm, I should say. And it doesn't matter what I believe now or what I believe in the future. Like, you guys have to understand that no matter how weird or geeky, cheeky, and freaky it might look, like, this magic, this part of me that I connected with in my time at this castle at the Crossroads with Hekate's guidance, like, that is what helped me become who I am today, and remember what I deserve, and remember my power, and remember the kind of life that I could create for myself if I simply decided it was so. I was able to bring forth my ideas into reality because I was able to think of things that I wanted to make, and then I made books like that were beautiful, like, and I made like jewelry, and I made like bracelets and all of these things that I visualized. That was the key. And I think people forget this when they're talking about witchcraft, and let me explain. Craft is in the name. I know, that's wild, okay? Bear with me here, my dear. Craft is in the name. That means it is like, almost like, what is a craft? It's like a creation of something, right? Like when you do arts and crafts, like you're creating something, like you're making art. Like, this is why I tell people witchcraft is an art too. And so many people have different types of witchcraft that is inherently magical, which is why it's hard to kind of define it in any way. And the more that I study all of the magic around the lands of the earth, I see that everybody kind of has their own way that they view it. And it's equally fascinating and terrifying, especially identifying as a witch in today's day and age, in the modern age, you know. But the point of my practice with Hecate was reminding myself and the magic of myself through all phases of my life. No matter if I was that little 16-year-old girl attending the rituals for the first time, or when I was, you know, cleansing my space and myself for the last time before I left, and all the spaces in between that I really focused on finding who I was and what kind of magic did I have and who could I like work with in my practice. And of course I've always been a girl who follows her dragons, but deities were always something that I struggled with. And when I was a little girl and first started, like literally a child, and I started this channel, I had a very strong connection to Isis, or like Aset. Aset is how you pronounce her like Kemetic name, so just to like clarify. And that was really important when I was young, because my connection to, I'm going to use her name Aset for the rest of the video. My connection to Aset was literally from my first lesson in 5th grade. I remember it so vividly when we were learning about like world religion, literally in 5th grade. Our textbook, I had like the white like guy with like the headdress that you see on the pharaohs. I will bring a picture of it in one of my streams because it's hilarious and it went viral on TikTok. And it's so crazy because I remember like studying like with those books. So wow, wild. But we learned about Greek, Roman, and Egyptian mythology and the pantheons. Kind of wild, but that was like my first exposure to belief systems outside of Mormonism, because even when I was on the playgrounds of school at recess, I was asking my friends about what they believed. And all the ones that I asked, they were all different variations of Christianity. And so that's all that I knew. There was very few kids who really were like atheist, I guess you could say. Most of them had some sort of belief in God, and I wonder if that was just the friend groups that I had. Probably was just the friend groups that I had, or was just like the location that we were in, because we were kind of in a more conservative part of like my city. So not too terribly sure about that part. But the experience nonetheless was that all my exposure when I was on the playground was really just Christianity and different kinds of versions of it. and my mom wasn't very religious one way or the other, right? But like I had like the Mormonism influence through my dad's side of the family, which is why I also feel like my dad in turn was really so supportive of me exploring witchcraft, because, you know, it's not my story to tell, but like he had his own experience with Mormonism too. And like here on my channel, like I'm just trying to share like my perspective of like, you know, my spiritual practice and how I find magic in the world and where magic is real and how it's real in this life. That's just kind of what my channel exists for. And like I literally find magic everywhere and everything, and it's so awe-inspiring, and all it makes me want to do is learn more. And the more that I learn about it, the more that I discover different like lifestyles of human beings, because each person who has a practice, it's a lifestyle more than anything, is what I've come to realize. Like I've come across like less like witches on my hand than I can count who were like truly like awful evil people. Like I'm telling you, like if you're trying to define all of the witchy community, all of like the pagan community or the polytheistic community based on those lights, like it doesn't make sense to me. Like I don't know what, I don't care what people want to call me when I say that, but I'm just like, how does it make sense? Like everybody's so different and unique. Like their belief systems, it's so hard to like label people like that, at least in my eyes, the more that I study, because everybody kind of has their own style, if you will, because it's a lifestyle and an art. And like I don't express myself the way that you do, and you don't express yourself the way that I do. And all I know is that when people have tried to control the way that I express myself, it really hurt me, and it really like made me hate myself and hate this world. And I know that when I study like patterns and statistics and like hear real people's stories about this and their lived experiences with like their identities and exploring their identities under like religious households, they're never happy stories. They're never happy stories. Rarely they are. And I think the real true critical error is like forcing things upon people who are not yourself. Like it's such an individual experience. And growing up, when I was in history class, you know, like I learned about the Constitution of the United States, believe it or not. And the amendment that really stuck out to me as a little girl was, you know, the religious freedom, the right to religious freedom. And already at that age, when I was so into like, you know, dragonology, and I had like studied these myths, and I had just like, that was really my like introduction to all of this, like I guess occult knowledge, you could say. It was just my fascination with dragons, and I loved them so much. And the dragonology books were really so important for me in my practice, because they have like hints and, you know, I guess you could say grains and sparkles of the truth in there, and that's kind of what makes them so compelling, you know what I mean? Every good lie has a truth in it, right? So that's where I learned that, was from the dragonology books, because they're presented as like kids books, and parts of it is like, you know, fantasy and made up, and like supposed to be hypothetical of like, oh, the different dragon eggs and how to find them and their migration patterns and all of that. But like for a little kid, it made it so real. And that was truly my introduction to magic, right? But also, I never left this, right? I never left this part of myself. When I grew into a teen, there was always that love of the dragons and that love of the awe that they brought me, and never got rid of my dragonology books, right? I kept them throughout my entire childhood, and I recently bought a new one so I can make an ASMR video going through all of like the exercises in the dragonology handbook and show you guys all of the amazing like goodies that are in it. I feel like it's an underrated one, honestly, from the dragonology series. But personally, in my craft, these were kind of like the seeds that compelled me to want to learn more. And when I stayed at this crossroads, you know, this like house that was in the crossroads that was like renovated to look like a castle, like you see in the thumbnail of this video, that's the house I'm talking about. And my experience and like encounters and like you know, just understanding and learning of Hecate and what she symbolizes and the magics that she's associated and what she represents for people. And I saw so many different kinds of people that came through there for all of these rituals, you know, especially when like Hecate was present or some other deities. Like there were other ones, you know, like Artemis, to throw one out there for just argument's sake, I guess. But like my favorite part about it was that I got to hear about how everybody connected with Hecate and how everybody connected with, you know, certain kinds of magic in their own way, and how many people who were just skeptical and coming around to learn. And it was just such a good exposure for me to see like all these different perspectives and all of these different ways that made magic real. Because if you were to go to that witchy class, that witchy circle with me, I should say, it was set up like a class for people to learn with the packets and stuff, but the magical part of it, the circle part of it, the actual like ritual part of it, that part that attracted so many people who are called to that kind of a thing from all over the place, and being able to have a circle with them and learn how different we see the same thing was truly what made me realize that magic is absolutely real. Because if you got in that circle and asked everybody what they defined magic and witchcraft for them, it would be different for every single one of them. But absolutely none of them would argue that it wasn't witchcraft or magic. And I think that's kind of the most beautiful lesson. Those are among the most beautiful lessons that I learned from the people there in those rituals. But it was a whole other experience practicing by myself in that house. I had been going to this house for so many years, since I was a teenage girl, many times over my life, in different times in my life, with different people in my life. And there were so many polarizing memories, both good, bad, and like neutral, if you will, that at this point in time, now that I lived at this house, this castle at the Crossroads, and I had established my own associations and rituals and memories of Hecate here, that's when my true relationship with Hecate really took hold. You know, I really worked with her when I was like first starting to go there. Was my first encounters, which was like 16, right? But like I lived there from like, I think like it was like 19 or 20 that I was probably like, no, I think it was 19 that I lived there. 19 to 20 to 20, I think. I don't know, guys. It was like somewhere around that age area. And this is where I really invested my time into working with Hecate and making my own rituals. And that's when Hecate became like the, I guess you could say, the matron or the patron of my magic, my witchcraft. Not in the sense that like my magic was for her, not in the sense that I needed her for my magic, in the sense that like Hecate was the example that I looked up to practice. I had no idea what I was doing. And in my experience with, you know, this devotee of Hecate showing me over many years in the times that I'd come here on my own before I lived here, with all of the magic that I had developed by myself using those packets, and, you know, before I even encountered her, remembering how I was just naturally magical and inclined to that. That is what really shaped the foundation of the magic that I practice today and why I practice the way that I do. Right? Like a lot of people, you know, they honor, they worship, they venerate their deities or their gods and goddesses, and that's totally valid. But my experience with many of these deities after this encounter and experience with Hecate at this Crossroads Castle, 110% made them almost like examples for me to live up to. And the ones that I resonated, I studied them and tried to understand, like, hey, what are the parts of these deities that I want to be like? Why am I so called to them, and why do they feel so present in my life? And it was because I realized that it's because I needed something that they were able to help me with, if that makes sense. And in working with Hecate this way, her being like an example of how I wanted to practice my magic, it completely revolutionized it from like something that I would follow out of a book, because at that age I was really young. Like I said, I first started like going to these rituals when I was 16. And I started my magic way earlier than that. You know what I mean? Like, you can check it on my channel, right? And it was just fundamentally, like, the word I would use is groundbreaking, because, I don't know, it was groundbreaking in the sense that Juniper's, because that's the one you're supposed to catch. Very made it. Welcome. I'm so happy you made it. Yay. Sorry, I just saw your username and I had to catch you. But yeah, guys, this was kind of the most phenomenal part of this experience, was because it gave me a real-time experience, and it gave me a real example of how different people work with their, like, gods and goddesses in their practice as, like, a witch or a pagan or, like, polytheist. It's so different for everybody. And I even met so many, you know, people who were skeptical and, like, just came to support, like, a loved one, which I think was the most powerful part of this entire experience in my lifetime. Is because talking to these people who were skeptical also offered me a polarizing contrast to the incredibly heartfelt, devoted, like, views and practices and relationships some of these witches of all genders, please, which is a gender neutral term, I must add, all of them that I met in my time there. It was really like, I literally saw, like, the rainbow of magic there through the eyes of all of these people, and that was, like, the best part of it. And that was something that I think a lot of people misunderstand if they don't have an experience like that. Because even I, somebody who's in the community and loved love magic and love witchcraft and studied it many years before I attended these open circles that were usually, like, for Hecate or included Hecate in some way, that was truly, like, the first experience that I had, and, like, it was the first experience I had in, like, group, like, magic and ritual. And it really set that like, foundation for me. It gave me an example, it gave me elders that I could ask, and it helped me find their resources too. And the devotee of Hecate I'm speaking of in this video, I will make a video about her very soon, but I'm being told now is not the video to discuss it, just because we really want to focus on Hecate's message, if that makes sense. Because I feel like the only reason why I've ever really been called to this space is because I needed the magic. I needed the witchcraft after the religious abuse that I went through with the church. I couldn't go back into a religious environment, and I had so many questions with my spirit, and naturally it just led me there. Mostly I was interested in nature. That's truly what led me to most of this. The nature is always, like, nature is my church is something that I've always, like, said to people and always believed. And now it's still my church, and I think that that's always gonna be like that. There's just a sense of magic and peace that I find when I'm in the heart of, like woods, or by a stream, or, like, in canyons, or in the snow, or in the rain. Like, nothing compares. And that's kind of what drew me there. I wanted to learn about that. I wanted to learn about how people connected spiritually with that. And it healed me in the sense that Hecate helped me heal my sense of, like, I never worshipped Hecate, but she helped me understand a different, like, view of divinity, if you will. A different, like, goddess, like, contrast to God. Because when I was a little girl, I really couldn't see outside of, like, you know, polarity, if you will, and I was barely understanding, you know, the concept of neutrality, in the sense of just my whole life exposure for the most part was nothing but extremes of opposites, and it was just exhausting, and it fried my nervous system. And, like, that's why the practice that I have today is so diverse and so, like, contradictory, as some people might call it, is simply because I just follow what regulates my nervous system. And the foundation of where I made this practice of having my magic help be medicine in a way. It's like magical medicine, if you will. But I'm not a therapist, and I'm not like a doctor. Like, I'm none of those things, because I'm not, like, qualified to, like, I don't have, like, degrees in these things. Like, I'm not going to claim myself to be those. But here's the thing. I had no resources at a time when I needed help, and I was looking everywhere I could find for something to help me with what I was struggling with. And this magic and these rituals and these open circles that I went to and attended with really helped create a foundation, a sense of consistency, and a sense of home for me to express myself and explore myself in magic. And the more that I did that, the more that I realized that it helped me discover who I am, and it helped me discover who I wanted to be. When I was in these like ritual spaces, when I created these like ceremonies for myself to do for certain intentions, I met different versions of myself, and I met different lessons that were already within my heart that I simply just had to listen for. And that was mostly the most important thing about these rituals that made them so magical, is because it enabled me to create a space where I opened my heart to receiving and even holding, you know, the wisdom of my soul that is just like what makes this whole life so magical. Like, what's different between me and Potat is that I have a soul and I can animate myself, and Potat needs me to animate him. You know what I mean? That is the crazy part that I think we can't ever forget, is how like truly miraculous it is that we can even have this conversation, let alone the technology and the creations we have. Like, I'm able to have this life and go through experiences and remember that and like think about it and talk about it and connect about it, and that is just divine creation. Like, how can I, how it's so intelligent. I could never even create this on my own. What? Like, that's wild. I can't even believe it. So the most important thing that I want to remind myself, like in this time, right, because I was going through really, really dark things, like, you know, some of the darkest things that I'm not ready to talk about on this channel yet were happening at this time, and I needed to find the courage to go. And I met many goddesses before it got too bad, and I don't really want to go too much into that because it had nothing to do with the devotee of Hecate and everything to do with my ex, but that's it. I need people to understand that when you are lost in the darkness and you have no idea where to go, you will call out to anything that will listen. And sometimes this really hurts people, and sometimes this really helps people, and sometimes this really does nothing for people, and it does all the kinds of things in between. And that's kind of what makes humanity so fascinating, is because we're all so different in the way that we seek help that way. You know, there's so much, you know. So when I really started working with Hecate, living at this house, it was really based around the moon. That's when the moon became really significant in my practice, specifically the phases of the moon. I developed different rituals that I like learned like through the symbolism with Hecate and through the moon phases and through different associations that I could find about the magic. You know, that is how I built these rituals and ultimately used the symbolism and ultimately used, you know, the act of ritual, the act of, you know, putting myself in a trance-like state, the act of believing, right? The act of faith. It's the act of faith that's probably the most important, you know, and having the courage to show up and know that I was going to cast my circle and I would be safe, and I was going to, you know, interact with these like spirits, and I was going to interact with these dragons, and I was going to interact with these gods and goddesses and like these deities, and I was going to be safe no matter what was real or not, no matter what anyone could prove, no matter what I could even describe, right? I just wanted to see for myself because I felt this like longing to know, like this needing to know ever since I was really young. You know what I mean? I was like, what about a goddess? And I got in trouble, you know, like, and I'm like, why? Like, I never understood, and I will never ever forget. And moving forward, more and more as time went on, I ultimately realized that this was this was something unlike anything that I ever had encountered or ever probably would encounter again. And that's when I realized that magic and witchcraft is truly its unique own practice, and anyone is going to have a slightly different definition of it, because this is exactly why many witches become witches, is simply because the construct of Christianity or Mormonism in my case, or Catholicism, or any sort of practice that they grew up with, it didn't serve them well, and it actually hurt them, and it dysregulated their nervous system rather than regulated your nervous system. And that is exactly the opposite, the antithesis of what religion is supposed to do. It's supposed to help people. It's supposed to, you know, help you connect. It's supposed to be like, you know, spiritual medicine in a way that it brings structure to your life and it brings community to you if you feel lost, you know. And we get it wrong when we take advantage of that and we force it on people, and we call certain people like evil or wrong or sinners. Like, it's not our position to judge. It never was. And why do we forget so much? I'll never understand it. And that's why I just wanted to learn so much about how different people believe, because everybody has their own experience, everybody has their own faith, and everybody has their own phase of the moon, as Hecate told me and taught me. Everybody comes in their own different shape and size of the moon, and it's just so easy to see, like, once you understand, like, it's obvious. And the biggest illusion is the illusion of separation, which is just what probably has most people in a chokehold because of their fear. And I know that because I was there, and that's the only reason why I feel the need to, like, share that part of my journey, because of how much I grappled with it and how much it really affected parts of my experience, you know. And even still to this day, like, sometimes I'll get that, like, religious, like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, but it's just like, intention matters the most in anything when it comes to practices of magic and practices of faith. And when you do things like that, it's all about what's in your heart, you know. And it's so easy to understand and see how so many different practices, like, you know, witchcraft and so many different, like, flavors of magic, if you will, have just changed and evolved and been created out of necessity by people who felt lost and hopeless, by people who needed to find their own way, by people who needed to take their own power back, by people who needed to feel safe again, by people who needed to find home. Like, there's so many different reasons. And I don't want to forget that, and I don't want to let people forget that. And that's why, you know, I share the stories that I do, as hard as they are for me sometimes to speak about them. Because in my journey working with Hecate, I saw many scary sides of myself. Many sides of myself where I saw how I could really break people's hearts and how I could hurt people if I wanted to, if I used what I learned, like, for the wrong reasons. And, you know, I absolutely dabbled in, like, bad, like, magic, like, in magic that I'm not proud of now. You know, it was very, like, I guess I would say, like, selfish, and it was, you know, born out of insecurity and was driven by ego. And it wasn't driven, that's not magic, like, that's not what makes it magical, right? Like, that's what makes it malicious. And there's a difference, you know, because everybody has their own path, and sometimes people are just trying to experience and feel their way out of things. And that's why, like, human beings are messy, and, like, we need that allowance to be messy. And I learned that working with Hecate. I did bad magic with Hecate, I did good magic with Hecate, I did magic that didn't matter. Like, I did magic of all kinds and of all sorts, and that is what made my practice what it is today. And even if you put somebody else like you who's watching me right now, if you were to put you in my shoes and go through that experience at this, you know, Crossroads Castle with Hecate, you would have a much different experience that is set through the context of you and your heart and your eyes and your soul, because that is what makes this life so special. And I learned about these different phases of myself, and I learned that I would always be having them. Hecate really taught me that every single moment is a new phase of ourself. Every single day is a new phase of ourself, you know, like, I am somebody new right now in this moment than I was before I took X, Y, and Z action. Like, this is how we change. Or before this experience I had, like, it really changed me as a person. Sometimes we're forced to change when we don't want to. And it's all of these phases, right? The good, the bad, the ugly, the ones that we think don't really matter, but all of it together is what makes us whole. And I couldn't deny any phase of myself. And I had to honor myself. And that's why I got this tattoo, to kind of remind myself that I will always honor each phase of myself. Hecate will always have that influence over me, because it was through these experiences of each ritual, of hearing each person's perspective of how they experienced Hecate in the rituals that we did in the open circles, and how I ultimately had my own experience with her over those years, and how it changed and morphed. I realized just how truly metamorphic it is in nature. Each day is a new day with magic, and that's something that contrasts religion, especially organized religion like Islam or Christianity or Mormonism. There is this absolute differentiation between people's practices, and some people are similar, and you'll find traditions from here to there, but especially in this age that we live in, the new age, everybody is so unique. It is something that is truly spectacular to witness, and I think something that makes the practice so fun to explore. But with that comes its cons too, and I think people forget that it's supposed to be there for those who need it, right? Like spirituality and religion and faith and having these beliefs in the unseen, all of that is there for those who need to have it, to live their best lives here on earth. Because a lot of people have a lot of unanswered questions, and a lot of people struggle through the phases of life, if you will. And sometimes we need to rely on things when we're alone that we didn't know we needed, and it completely changes our lives. And there always has to be room for that, or we've lost. We've lost, period. And there's more than enough room for all of us to be who we are. Like, come on, guys. Let's not kid ourselves. There's more than enough room for us to be who we are. Like, why are we so concerned with encroaching on other people's space to be who they are, instead of focusing on how we want to be instead? And why is how we want to be sometimes encroaching on who people are? Like, that is the biggest question I have still left unanswered. But I hear many kinds of answers from many kinds of people, and it makes me realize that this world is not so black and white. It's not so yin or yang all the time. It is a spectrum, and everybody who sees light and darkness in different things are going to look different for different people. And that is what makes humanity different from the animal kingdom, if you will. We have these different ways of believing in life and living our lives in our own style that is truly something of our own, even within groups of us that are the same. And even people who practice the same religion, they're also different in how they express and explore and experience that, you know? And I want to remind people that no matter where you're at, 111 on the clock, no matter where you're at in your practice, no matter where you're at in your magic, you can always lean into different phases of your magic, of your life. And it doesn't make you any less magical if a phase that you need to explore is one where you're lost, where you don't practice, and you barely study, and you just happen upon Azura's videos from time to time. That is valid too. I had moments in time where I couldn't show up on this channel. I couldn't be me. I couldn't make content. I didn't know who I was. I wasn't gonna make content like that, and when I tried, it just was really messy. And ultimately, nowadays, especially with where I'm at in my life, I need to be so for real with myself about what actually matters and what impact I think is the most important. And when I see just constant destruction all around me, I'm just realizing how much we need to be like constructive with the way that we connect with each other, especially with people that we don't understand and don't know. And it's the dragons who taught me that. And for those of you guys who don't know, Hecate is associated with the serpent or the snake, which on this channel we classify as like a subcategory of like the dragon family, if you will. So one thing that I really loved about the dragonology books as a kid, and when I study mythology, because the dragonology books were based off of real world mythology, a lot of creative liberty was taken, don't get me wrong, but that's kind of how I got into this. And it showcases how different the dragons look, right? So you have like some that have just wings and no legs, and some that look like 2 legs and wings, and some that look like just 4 legs and no wings, etc. And some of them are sea serpents or serpents, which have no legs and no wings, and that's what makes them serpents. And Hecate being associated with serpents and my love for dragons was always a point of curiosity for me. And I don't know how many people realize that she's associated with dragon energy that way, but a lot of dark feminine goddesses are. I think a lot of people forget a lot of dark feminine goddesses are associated with dragon energy. And I could probably name a million off my hands. Like, you know, Lilith is probably the most like famous example, but you have, you know, the Morgan, you have Ma Kali, you have so many that have like associations with serpents or like dragon energy or like shape-shifting or like the archetypes of dragons. And it's because that dragon energy is associated with like darkness, it's associated with the void, it's associated with that unknown and the unseen. It's almost as if humanity is personifying their fears as dragons. And the more that you study that, it's like the more that you look back and the more that you cross-reference these myths and mythologies and these stories and tales from even the most remote communities of people, like in islands and stuff like that, you'll realize that the dragons were always something to be feared and something that was awe-inspiring and something that was able to rival, if not supersede, the power of man. And that's kind of what I think captures our hearts so much, because chances are you can ask any human in the world, do you know what a dragon is? And they're gonna absolutely know what a dragon is. And that fascinates me, because that's more like hear me out, guys, like let me cook. I'm pretty sure more people are aware of what dragons are than more people are aware of who Justin Bieber is. And that, when I really think about that, actually is insane to me, because dragons are real pop stars actually, in the sense that like they are everywhere. Everybody has some sort of famous myth or legend or god like them, like deity, divinity like them, even if they were a negative personification, or especially so, if I may insist. That is what makes it something I could never forget, something that really set the context of everything that I did in my craft, because dragons were always a part of my life ever since I was a little girl. And working with Hecate and learning more about her, and especially when we did like the phases of the moon with Hecate, and when I say different phases, I would also say like different skins, if you will, like shedding of skins, right? Like it's no different than that kind of a concept and that kind of like a line of thinking, right? We have all these different phases of the moon in our lives. We have all these different shed skins in our lives. Is kind of the overall lesson that Hecate told me and taught me in my life, and especially at my time in this castle at the Crossroads, because of how much influence, you know, she had over the rituals within like the context of like they were made within like her image, or they were made like to include her, because a lot of the rituals we did included many goddesses, right? Like it was very goddess driven, but there was like some like god and goddess stuff with like different ones. I remember like Cernunnos one time. I was really little though, but that's kind of like where I really got that deep understanding more than I could have ever gotten with my explorations in videos online, in books that I could read, and things that I could create myself from learning that. Especially when it comes to working with people. Like, it's one thing to do magic maybe with your best friend, and it's an entirely different thing doing it with a group of people. I really just want to emphasize that, because I had many experiences in my lifetime growing up where my friends or even my like exes would ask me to do magic with them and show them and teach them, and I did. And it was nothing like having it in like a group ritual setting that I did at this castle at the Crossroads, right? Just nothing like it, right? That was truly my focus here. That was like the most important part of it, if you will. And I don't mean to alarm anybody, but in my time here was when, and like when I started going at like 16 and stuff, is when I started to feel enabled to explore darker kinds of magic, like cursing and hexing and, you know, mess around with some love spells I shouldn't have, and like tried to like casted like out of jealousy. I was a child when I practiced, mind you, for some of my craft. Let's not forget I was a kid and was just trying my best to understand how to navigate my world when I really lacked that consistency, that foundation. And when I did have it, like the church, or when I did have it like within family, it was either abusive because the church fell just did not do service to me, if you will. It was not a good experience. And then, you know, my family, like my parents got divorced, and that really shattered my world, and that foundation of a sense, right? So this was a very early age for me, and that's part of why like I struggle so much, you know, with like mental health, in the sense that like I've been through a lot, and so it really like alters the way that I perceive reality. And the one way growing up that really enabled me to take control of that narrative for my life was my witchcraft, and large in part was influenced by Hecate, because of how much this particular, you know, space, this castle at the Crossroads, and the people that went there, and of course the devotee that owned the home, taught me. It was all part of this miraculous, magical adventure that I had the honor and the privilege of experiencing when I was so desperately in need of community, of people who I could ask about how to practice, where I could see examples from professionals that were well learned and well trained and qualified to take me on as a student and to show me how to practice and how to lead others in practice was a huge part of my study there. That is what matters more than anything in my journey as a witch. And I will probably always identify as a solo practitioner, simply because that is kind of how it goes when you're a dragon witch. You know, they just kind of take you on your own path. Even if you're a group of dragon witches, they're also different. It's almost like you're just a group of eclectic witches. But that's what makes us dragon witches, is we always have our head in books way more than anyone else. In the sense where we have like this desire for knowledge that we have to learn, and it has sometimes we have the most extraordinary standards for how that looks, and it's because we're driven by the standards of what the dragons tell us. And it's truly the most challenging part of my life, in the sense of owning the parts of myself that are less than favorable, parts of myself that I don't advertise, because those are parts of me. I know that parts of you like that exist too. That's kind of like the whole point that we learn, like we're all reflections of each other, and we're all mirrors of each other, and who we're like peering at and who we're looking at are kind of like reflections of us. in the sense that we're all kind of on a similar wavelength, even when some of us are coming across as like lurkers, or some of us are coming across as haters, or some of us are coming across as engaged happy members. Like, all of us are on some sort of frequency that brings us together for the experience, and however people want to define that is really unique to them, right? Like, it's really unique to them. And that is something that I want to hold space for and want to vocalize, because I see not many people talking about this. And when I talk about it with my friends, and, you know, not only like people online, but people of all different practices and faiths, everybody has their own way of connecting with, you know, the unseen, with something that's higher than them, a greater power, if you will. And they all feel scared to follow that faith if people won't accept them. That's universal for all of us, yet it's still so difficult sometimes to own it, right? To own who we are and to practice it and to be part of those communities. And working with Hecate was the experience of my lifetime that taught me how to show up. It taught me how I wanted to practice. And my practice now is nothing like those packets that I used to get. But those packets that I used to get informed huge parts of my practice. And that, I think, is a beautiful paradox that is also encapsulated by Hecate's like dark feminine energy, being a dark goddess, as well as, you know, her association with serpents and snakes. It's very serpent energy. And all of that has its own unique, beautiful part to life, you know what I mean? And everybody's gonna see that kind of a symbol differently because of its truly unknown nature and how individualized it is for each person. You know, even between two snakes, when they shed their skins, they have different quality skins. It's different, sometimes colors, even if they're the same species, it's slightly different. It's, you know, the pattern is different here and there. It's ultimately unique. Ultimately a spectrum everywhere you look. And why do we forget that? Why do we forget that? I can't forget that. I actually won't forget that. I can't stop talking about it. It's a special interest. Hi, hello. Welcome to the channel, because I can't stop talking about it. It fascinates me so deeply. And I think people, you know, might see me practicing things they would never expect, like Islam, for example. And they would never expect me going in that direction. And the truth is like, I'm always the same person that is just trying to find the magic in this world, and just trying to find the rituals and the routines and the regular practices that bring me solace, that help me heal, that make me enabled to show up alive, happy, who I want to be, helping others, being in service of my community, and giving back where I can, because that is what matters. That is what I want to focus on, is how I can be here for others now, because I have been through so much and I know what it's like to not have anyone but Hecate sometimes. And ultimately, that was the scariest part of my journey. Part of my journey, nevertheless, because there was a time when I truly felt far from the dragons, and even considering leaving them altogether. And in that time, I really relied on Hecate, and it was very tied into this castle at the Crossroads. My experiences there, my journeys there, and the time that I spent there informed large parts of my practice in between. And that is kind of the main focus, right? Hold on, my phone is gonna die. Let me charge it. That's kind of the main focus, right, guys? Like, the reason why we practice what we practice and we do what we do, and why we talk about what we do on this channel, is because we're looking for things that help us. And we like to hold space for other hatchlings who have had different experiences, but their different experiences helped them feel happy and feel like they are excited to be alive, because that's what we prioritize, right? Like, that is what's important, especially here on this channel. I hope in more places. I hope to see it in more places. But I don't want people to, you know, be so quick to judge each other. It's truly the thing that like breaks my heart the most. Like, if you ever want to grant a birthday wish, just chill. You know what I mean? Like, people need to just chill, I think, for everybody. But there's like a balance of everything, right? Like, it's important to have tradition. It's important to have things that are unchanged. It's important to have things that are memorialized and practiced and kept, you know, in that pristine, preserved manner. That is important and part of humanity and part of what's precious. But also what's important is the way that we change and evolve and adapt and create, and that too is important. And there needs to be space for all of it to coexist and commingle and co-create, or we have lost it. It's already gone, and you're just in a fallacy, right? You're just in a bubble. Like, but I have seen so much hope and so much connection from people who are skeptical and people who believe and people who don't believe, all curious. That is what matters. And that is, like, I think ultimately what attracts a lot of people to witchcraft and paganism and the occult and stuff like that, is that curiosity. And more than anything, the curiosity needs to be about each other, because, and how to like build a better world for each other, you know? And there's so many places where we can start, right? And people get overwhelmed, but that's why, like, here on my channel, I'm just here to remind people to start here. Start on your heart first. Like, start on your mind first. What's your condition? Like, be honest. What's your condition, right? Like, that's what matters, you know? Because there's so many people who have, what's the word, like an agenda with how they treat everybody, an agenda, how they want to present themselves, they want to be viewed, they want to move in the world, yada yada, and it is exhausting. That's why the best thing any and all of us can do is just focus on how can we be in tune with ourselves, how can we be empowered with ourselves, how can we be confident in ourselves, how can we be healthy for ourselves, how can we be kind and courteous to others, like how can we show up as the best versions of ourselves. It's time. You know, that's the phase I'm at right now with Hecate. And it's taken me many moons, many blood moons to get here. And that is, like, some people would say the evil part of it. But the ones who walked the path would say that is the left-hand part of it. And, you know, if it was meant to be any other way, you guys, it would be. We would be different people. We would have a different way of life. It would be a different world in reality. But we find ourselves in the one that we are today. And it's free to be kind. It's also free to judge people. It's hard to be kind. It's entertaining to judge people. But when you choose to regulate yourself in a way that makes you able to show up in a way that's positive and beneficial, not only for yourself but others around you, ultimately that's how you win the game. And this is the only reason why people have things like religions and, you know, witchcraft practices and, you know, pantheons of gods, and like, I'll never understand it all because I'm not them. How could I judge them? It doesn't make sense. It literally doesn't make sense. Which is why we just want to hear about you, your craft, your perspective, your experience, because it's so different. And the more that you hear about different people's points of view and their faith and their rituals and their belief systems, the more you're able to see the bigger picture and you're able to understand how like we're so much the same. Like we're literally doing the same thing in different fonts, and that's funny. It's funny. You know? So that is the message I have, the story I have of being at Hekate's Crossroads Castle. If you want a part 2, leave a like on the video and let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to join the Hatchling Clan Discord server. First link in the description of this video. Can't wait to hang out with you guys, but until next time, sticky, hatchlings! Blessed be and bye.